Joshua. Joshua chapter 1. Joshua. Verse 7. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. Jim has our message for us this morning.
Good morning. I think I got it fixed upstairs back here, so that's working. I think it was last week, I told Vanya and Lucy about my grandma who did not like mice, right? And if she saw a mouse, you know, they went along the floor, they're really fat. She would squeal and jump right up on top of the table, even though she was an old lady. You might say she was afraid. That got me to thinking, and other things about what kind of things make you afraid, because not everybody's afraid of mice. Some people might be afraid of spiders. Do you like it when spiders come? Follow along? No, I don't think Gail likes spiders.
Yeah, I like spiders.
Oh, Don, you don't like spiders?
Nah.
No. Yeah. Everybody has something, and it's different. I had a young man that worked for me, and he was very much against spiders. And a couple of the other fellows that were working with us figured that out, and so somewhere there was a big spider, like, you know, that big around, all furry. It was around where we were working. So anyway, they caught it, put it in a Ziploc bag. And then they took the Ziploc bag, and when he came back from wherever he was, they got it out and said, "Oh, we have something for you." And of course, he took the bag and he looked, and everyone enjoyed great merriment as he hopped all around and squealed and carried on. Probably that wasn't too kind, but. So what are you afraid of? Spiders or snakes? Mouses? I'm going to share with you a few people today from the Bible who are afraid, and maybe we can learn something from it. Some people are afraid of when it gets to be dark. Some people are afraid of when they're up on a high place and it looks like it's a long way down. The very first person I found in the Bible who was afraid was Adam. So I didn't have to go very far. Here's what it says. Adam and Eve heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees. And the Lord called to Adam and said, "Where are you?" And he answered, "Well, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." Why was Adam afraid? God hadn't been too scary before.
Now he knew right and wrong.
Well, now he knew right and wrong. Is that what made him afraid? I think maybe he'd done something wrong. And sometimes that makes us afraid. We're afraid because we know we've displeased someone we value. Sometimes a dog will do that, right? They know when they've gone wrong, and you can tell. Their very posture indicates they're afraid. Adam was afraid here because he had done what he was told not to, plain and simple. And in so doing, he damaged his connection with God. And so he says, I was afraid. You can be afraid because you've done something to damage a relationship or done something that you shouldn't do. Here's the next person. There's many, but I just chose these. Here's Jacob. Now, Jacob, he a lot of times maybe he was afraid. He practiced a little bit of a deception, maybe a big deception, on his brother, and that made his brother mad. And he ran away. And he ran to his uncle's house. And while he was there, he found out that his uncle's daughters were kind of interesting. But his uncle kind of practiced a little deception on him, and so before long, Jacob was married to 2 daughters rather than 1. And then Jacob worked, those 14 years, maybe more years for his uncle, and he'd accumulated a lot of wealth. In those days, that was sheep and goats. If I had a lot of sheep and goats, I don't know if I would be rich. Finally, Jacob realized that he was getting too big and prosperous for his uncle's liking. And God told him, Jacob, it's time to go back to the land of Israel, back to your father. So Jacob packed up his wives, his children, his livestock, his servants, everything that he had accumulated, and he left. But he didn't really say goodbye. In fact, he didn't say anything. He just left. Well, 3 days later, his uncle found out about it and chased after Jacob. Now, his uncle was kind of a little bit greedy, I guess I would say. And he liked the idea of Jacob being there because God was blessing Jacob. In any event, finally, verse 26 here of Genesis 31, Laban catches up with Jacob and he says, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs and timbrels and harp. You did not allow me to kiss my sons or my daughters. You have done foolishly in so doing. Maybe his uncle Laban wouldn't have sent him away with joy and songs, but in any event, Jacob answered and he said, because I was afraid. I thought, perhaps he will take his daughters from me by force. Jacob felt that if he had gone and told Laban what he was going to do, there would have been a conflict. There would have been maybe an outright disagreement over what to do, and so he thought, well, I'll just leave without telling anybody. In this case, Jacob was afraid of a conflict. He was afraid he wouldn't get what he wanted. I think in each of these cases, you'll agree that sometimes we're afraid of the same things. We're afraid if we've hurt somebody's feelings. We're afraid if we've done something we shouldn't. And we might be afraid of a conflict or disagreement like Jacob was. Let's consider a few other folks here. Try to finish up. Even though we got off a little late start, we'll finish up on time. Here's somebody you probably wouldn't have thought of if I'd asked you to name people who were afraid. This is Elihu. You know who Elihu was? He was one of those people around Job. But he was younger. And here's what it says. Here's what Elihu says. Elihu the Buzite. He said, I am young in years, and you guys are very old. Therefore, I was afraid, and dared not air my opinion to you. I thought to myself, age should speak, multitude of years should teach wisdom, but there is a spirit in a man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Old men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. Therefore, listen to me, and I'll tell you my opinion. Indeed, I waited, I listened to you, I paid close attention, and none of you convinced Job. And he goes on. So what is Elihu afraid of? Well, he's afraid he's inadequate. He's too young. No one will pay attention to him. He would, in today's words, we would say he lacked confidence. He thought everybody else, well, at least in their own eyes, knew more than he did. That can happen to me too. There's somebody else who was afraid. You remember Elijah, right? He had a big day on Mount Carmel. And really, it was a big day. That all the nation was gathered there. We had the 450 priests over here. We had Elijah over here. And everybody knew it wasn't going to go well from one side or the other. And Elijah prayed and fire came down from heaven. And right there, it would have been a big day if it had just ended. But then he proceeded on and assassinated all of the priests of Baal. He waited for the rain. And then he hiked up his skirts, as you might say, and ran in front of Ahab's chariot many miles back to Jezreel, back to where Ahab was staying. Now it had been a really big day. If you think about you being there, or me being there, seeing fire come down from heaven and burn up stones and lick up the water, the rain coming after 3 years, and running in front of Ahab's chariot. He was a little tucker. Then Ahab got home and told his wife Jezebel everything that had happened, and Jezebel was not happy. And she sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I don't make your life like one of the prophets of Baal. They were all dead. The next verse here says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Many a sermon is preached saying, oh dear, why? Elijah had all these successes. How could he be afraid? But you know, it's the same for me. Oftentimes, right after there's been a big day and a big success, and you're weary and tired, is when you're most afraid. You're out of energy. And Elijah was out of energy. Later, God sent angels to minister to Elijah, and finally God came to him and said, what are you doing? And Elijah more or less said, boy, I worked really hard for you, but it's too much. Jezebel's after me. And he was smart. He knew that she was no one to be trifled with. Sometimes it's easy to cling to God's protection when you're tired and worn out. That was Elijah. Here's a few others. Jesus told a story in Matthew. It's recorded in the book of Matthew. There were 3 servants. And the master went off in a far place. This is Matthew 25. So he gave each of them some money. And however you want to count the value of the money, it doesn't make any difference. He gave 10 times as much to one, 5 times as much to the second, and just 1 to the third of the servants. And the way the story goes, as Jesus tells it, after a while, the fellow that had 10 times as much, he gained, or 5 times as much, he gave 5 more. That's the story up already. But you know the idea. The fellow with the twice as much, he gained some more. But then the servant with only the smallest amount, he went and hid it. By and by, the master comes back, and we get to the point that we want to consider. The servant who had only received the 1 talent came and said to his master, "Lord, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered, and I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground, and look, here it is." But the master wasn't very impressed. He said, "You wicked and lazy servant." And if the servant had any doubt about what was going on, that cleared it right up. The master was not happy. He said, "You ought to have at least got interest on the money." Well, let's consider a minute, since we're thinking about being afraid this morning. What is this servant afraid of? He said, "I was afraid, and I went and hid your money." He was afraid he couldn't do the job. Plain and simple. He was afraid he couldn't do the job. He was afraid that if he tried to invest in whatever, it might not go well, and then the master would be really upset. And he decided, since he was afraid he couldn't do the job, the best thing to do was hide. And he did. He hid the money. He didn't lose any, but he didn't gain any. The master was not happy. But sometimes I might be in this servant's shoes and be afraid I couldn't do the job. I won't be able to succeed. There's somebody else who was afraid. A fellow named Jairus. Jairus had a daughter who was 12. I can relate. And his daughter was sick. And like any dad with a daughter who's sick, he was ready to do anything and everything to solve the problem. That's the way it is with dads and daughters. So Jairus, he was a prominent religious person. He was a ruler of the synagogue, and he was in charge of the worship. And that was a big deal amongst the Jewish community. But he decided he would risk everything and go find Jesus because his daughter was sick. And even if it meant he was going to lose his job, even if it meant that he would lose his reputation and his prestige, because, well, Jesus wasn't well regarded by the establishment. They felt threatened by Jesus, and therefore they wanted to put Jesus away from the people. But Jairus realized, well, listen, it might really cost me, but my daughter is sick. So I'm going to go. Let the chips fall where they may, as we say, modern times. I'm going to go find Jesus. So he goes and finds Jesus, and he says, it says he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her, that she may be healed and will live." He knew exactly what he wanted to have happen. And Jesus went with him. But there were problems, right? Some other people showed up. There was a big crowd, and another lady showed up who was ill, and she needed to be healed, and she got healed, and the whole crowd stopped. And by, Jairus' servants come and say, "Listen, your daughter has died. You don't need to bother the teacher anymore. It's too late." But when Jesus heard what these folks had said, the servants had said, he turned to Jairus and said, "Do not be afraid. Only believe." Jairus was afraid. He was afraid his daughter would die. And that was something too big a problem for him to solve. he was a leader, he probably could solve a lot of different problems. But here was a problem that was too much for him. His daughter was sick, and he didn't know how to heal her other than reach out to Jesus. Jesus says, don't be afraid, only believe. We don't know what Jairus said, it doesn't say. But Jesus went on and healed the girl. I think I've been afraid in a similar fashion. When you face something, usually in this case, like a health emergency, that's just too big. What are you going to do? Jesus says, don't be afraid. Only believe. Maybe that causes you to be even more afraid because you realize how little you believe. Well, the story ends well for Jairus. Let's consider one more. And that's Peter. It had been another really big day for Jesus' disciples. He sent them off in a boat. At the end of the day, and it was kind of stormy and dark and lonely. And after Jesus had spent quite a while praying, he walked out across the water, right? You remember the story. But the disciples looked out of the boat, and you know, if I was in the boat, I think I would have been afraid too. If you looked out of the boat and saw somebody walking on the water, you'd realize that things weren't right. Either with the water or with yourself. But something was really wrong, because generally folks don't walk on the water. So, Peter calls out to Jesus and said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, well, it's a good idea. Come on in. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water. Well, that was a success. But when Peter saw that the wind was boisterous, the King James, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus stretched out his hand and picked him up and said, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got in the boat, the wind ceased. You see, Peter had reached out to Jesus and he climbed out of the boat and was walking on the water. But then he probably began to think, this is crazy. I'm on the water and the waves were up and the wind was blowing. I'm afraid in a boat when the wind is blowing and the waves are up. And Peter, probably thought, I don't know what it's like to stand on the water with the waves. Can you imagine? It's a little unsettling. And it was enough unsettling where Peter thought, oh no, this idea of getting out of the boat was not a good idea. And he began to sink. And he cried, Lord, save me. Peter was afraid. There's another time Peter was afraid too, right? It wasn't another year or so later that Jesus was being tried, and the people around there were trying to connect Peter with Jesus. He didn't say he was afraid, but he certainly was. Both instances, I think we can relate with. Just like Elijah, Peter had a time there, right? He had a moment of real connection with Jesus. If it's really you, Lord, tell me to come out there and walk on the water. All right, come on out. A lot of times, God will meet us where we are. But then, we start to think. And we become afraid. And we begin to doubt. Or like in the second time, everybody seems to be against us, and it seems like things aren't going well. We really don't know where God is going. We're afraid. Peter experienced both of those. But look what Jesus says. The disciples are a little bit concerned. They see Jesus walking on the water, and they say, wow, it must be a ghost. Only they can think of. How in the world can anybody walk on the water? And the answer is, in the world, nobody can. So Jesus says, well, hey, be of good cheer. I am. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And therein lies the point of our whole talk today. All these people have been afraid, very much like we're afraid. Afraid we can't do the job. Afraid we're inadequate. Afraid we've hurt somebody. Afraid because we've done something wrong. Afraid because we face a problem that's too big, like Jairus. Afraid because the enemy is after us. But you know the strange thing, which wouldn't really resonate with modern day therapists and so forth. But every time that kind of thing happens, you know what God's response is? Do not be afraid. Plain and simple. All he says is, do not be afraid. Jesus told the folks in the boat, do not be afraid. Here's a couple examples where this happens. And you can see just how silly it seems to be at first. Think of the Israelites. They left Egypt, and that had been quite a thing. There had been plagues and all kinds of horrible things happening. And finally they left, and it wasn't too many days later, they'd been marching down the road, and they come to the water. And there's mountains on either side, you can't scramble over. And somebody looks back, and they see that Pharaoh's army is coming. Now, Pharaoh was nobody to be trifled with. He had quite an army in those days. And they see the army coming, and they're pretty upset. They're pretty afraid. Just like we would be when it seems like you're between a rock and a hard place. Actually, the New International Version says they were terrified. Not just afraid, but terrified. That's when you're really afraid, right? They were terrified. And they said to Moses, was it because there was no graves in Egypt you brought us out here to die in the desert? They didn't have much hope. So Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Now, of course, in modern times, our response to that kind of instruction would be easy for you to say. You don't see the chariots. Or if you do, there's all of us between them and you. So, easy for you to say. Do not be afraid. We just heard a story about Jehoshaphat. And the first thing that God said to Jehoshaphat was, well, yeah, there's an army like the sand of the seashore coming and so forth, but do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Yet we've seen all these people who were afraid. What's the difference? All these cases we found where there was fear. Afraid you can't do the job, or not being good enough, or there's problems too big, or so on, or you're on the waves and it's boisterous, or you just experienced a real blessing of God and you're tired. If any of those things happen to me, aren't I afraid because I think I can't do it? The problem is I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't walk on water. I can't defeat the army. There's nothing I can do when my daughter is ill to the point of death, the way Jairus describes it. Or any of the other examples I've just given you. Or if I've done something wrong and I think, oh boy, am I in trouble now? All I'm thinking about is I'm measuring what I face compared with what I can do, and it doesn't match up. And that was the case for all of these people here. That was the case for Jacob. He thought, I'm just going to get out of here because this guy's going to be upset with me. There's going to be a big kerfluffle. I probably will come out the worst. I'll just leave. In every case, being afraid is when I look at what I can do compared with the problem I face. And in every case, when God shows up, he says, do not be afraid. Why does he say that? Because he knows how to fix the problem. In every single case. In the case of Adam, he proceeded to fix the problem. He got busy and made some clothes and said, yeah, you've really made a big mess here, but I've got a plan. Just in the next chapter, or actually later in the same chapter. For Jairus, he says, don't be afraid. Just hang on. I have a plan. That's why through Moses, he says to the people, don't be afraid. He knows what's going to happen. And nothing is impossible for him. Nothing is too big. Here's what King David says. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? All day they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather together. This is Psalm 56, if you ever want to take a look at it yourself. They gather together. They hide. They mark my steps. They lie in wait for my life. Shall they escape by iniquity? In anger, cast down these enemies, O God. You number my wanderings. You put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? When I cry out, then my enemies will turn back. This I know because God is with me. In God, I will praise his word. In the Lord, I will praise his word. In God, I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? That's Psalm 56. Now there's times David was afraid. But as he thought it over, his point was, no matter what people are doing, no matter what problem there is, I'll put my trust in God and see what happens. It may not always be what we want. God has a plan. He's not caught by surprise. That's why Paul had a lot of cases to be afraid, when they were all out to get him, putting him in prison, everything you can think of happened to him. His boat got wrecked underneath him. He was kind of like Peter. He was clinging to a board in the boisterous waves. Well, look what he writes to Timothy here, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but rather a spirit of power and of love and a sound mind. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power. He's given us a spirit of love. And he's given us a spirit of a sound mind. You know what that means, a sound mind? That doesn't just mean you're not crazy. A sound mind means that you've put the fear out of your mind and have gone back to thinking reasonably. Even though the army's coming, even though disaster's looming, even though I feel I can't do it, I say, I won't be afraid. Let me see what we can do with God. That's the sound mind. It's easy to say, don't be afraid. It's harder to practice. Right? If somebody says, do not be afraid, you think, I am afraid. You can't tell me not to be afraid. I'm terrified. I'm terrified because, the spider's crawling up my legs. Do not be afraid. Forget it. Take off running. You hop all around. You face calamity of some kind, and God says, do not be afraid. And you think, no, I am afraid. Awful things might happen. Things I don't want. What God says is, no matter, just coming to me, and we'll have the best outcome. There's an idea, this is a lot of people who are firefighters go on and on and on and on. I've heard them before in sermons and I kind of get weary. I won't go on and on and on and on. But if you go and take your training to be a firefighter, they teach you things about, how to set up ladders and how to work the hoses and those kind of things. They teach you how to break into people's houses, curiously. And they even give you tools to do it. Well, that's kind of interesting, but it's kind of an aside. They spend almost the entire class teaching you not to be afraid. Because if you're afraid, you'll kill yourself or somebody else. Plain and simple. So, when you're stuck in a dark place, they teach you how to not be afraid. And they talk all about how to do it. How to think, how to breathe, how to do all kinds of things to manage being afraid. And after they taught you all of that stuff and talked it through and so on and so forth, they bring a trailer truck. And it has a full-size trailer. And at the back of it on the roof, there's a hatch. And inside is a labyrinth of little tunnels made out of wooden floors and chain link fence-like stuff. And they're really small. In fact, they're so small that you can't crawl on them. You have to just kind of scrunch along on your belly. And there's little circles, 16 inches in diameter, you have to go through to get to the next level and so forth. And if you go inside a trailer truck and close the doors, it's pretty dark. In fact, you can't see your hand here. So, to see if you learned your lesson about not being afraid, you climb up a ladder, you open that nail, so someone opens the hatch, you climb in, and they clamp the hatch shut. And it's your job to get through the labyrinth and out the other side. Do not be afraid. And you can do it if you're not afraid. And if you panic, which many people do, what you don't know is there's a whole lot of instructors inside there and they can see you and you're all set. Point being that you can not be afraid. And you wouldn't believe it. I've seen people, freak out and ripping their clothes off and come bursting out of the trailer and so forth. But by the end of the training, they can do it. You can get in there and go through the whole thing without being afraid. You can train yourself not to be afraid. We'll end with this. We're going to end with God's instruction to Joshua. He faced a big challenge. First of all, he had the most cantankerous, difficult, rebellious, miserable army anyone ever started off to war with. They had already declared their fear 40 years before. Second of all, he faced people who were pretty entrenched. Here's what God says. God says to Joshua in Joshua 1, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross the Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I'm giving them. Every place that you put the sole of your foot, I will give you. From the wilderness and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates, and the land of the Hittites to the sea, shall all be your territory. No one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and of good courage. For to this people you will divide the inheritance I swore to their fathers to give them. Here's our text that Lois read. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book will not depart from your mouth, but you will meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do according to, a lot of twos there, all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And in a lot of respects, Jesus gives us the same instruction, does he not? Just before he left to go back to heaven, his last words were, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. May we courageously follow him. And no matter what we face, turn to him and hang on tight, no matter how rough the storm may be. Our closing hymn this morning is hymn number 99.
Ladies and gentlemen, because I was waiting for more people to show up, I did not mention second reading for Patty Shields to join here, and she is not here this morning. Thank you. I need somebody else, I'll take Jim's also. And I will send this off to the database, and one less thing for me to be afraid I'll forget. Are you guys, have a few minutes to stay for lunch? Heidi is preparing lunch downstairs.
Take a break. Oh, there's a little shield on there. Like, way up there. Probably, and I think when you tighten it, it's gone back up there. Every week, Don, you play, see. That's how you go. I think that, yeah, fixtures. Yeah, just.
I need to make a couple more of these, because these are off my, Oh, are you going to the, Bearings Museum? Actually, I heard it's going to be Oh, okay, yes, that's really nice, in the fall, so it's like a display. Well, I gotta get it all together. Bearings Museum.
I'm glad you folks are here. Thank you for doing the Sabbath school, Don.
I know there's lots of remodeling.
So thank you for doing the Sabbath school this morning.
Wish you'd have been here.
I wish I had too. I worked with that.
It was a good lesson too.
I bet it was.
Well, you know, taking games they played at the very end of time.
okay. Yeah.
You know, we're all different. Like this, doctrine of the immortal soul and,
Okay.
and the Sabbath are the two major,
Right?
but there'll be more. You know there'll be more. He's played so many games in this world, he has the whole world.
Well, he's trying to counterfeit what Christ can do, right? That's the big thing.
He's had the whole world really under his thumb.
Well, good. I'm glad you
Yeah.
took care of it.
Well, there's just three of us here. It was just Caroline and Lois. That was good.
But it was a good study.
People seem to be dropping like flies. Somehow Joan's nurse was coming today, so she couldn't come, and Bob fell down, and
Yeah. Hurt his knee or something.
yeah, hurt his knee, and so I know we were short.
Those things happen.
But I'm glad you were here, and it was a great relief to me. I didn't panic.
Appreciate
I
it.
just worked with Dad, and away we went, so it was good. Let's see.
And I forgot my hearing aid, so I had an awful time hearing people. I can hear you close up.
I don't like your complaints, because we weren't far from home, we could have turned around
And
and
if you want me to turn around and back up, no, I'm not.
Once you get started, you don't believe in going back?
Nope.
Are you going to be here in 2 weeks on the 17th?
Say that
Are you going to be here in 2 weeks from now on the 17th?
He's gonna preach.
I'm speaking.
Perfect.
I'll be here.
Okay.
We'll be here.
We'll be here. Okay.
All gardening flowers.
Good. Well, I assume you brought these today.
Oh, yeah,
All right.
they're
They're
going to
beautiful.
You gotta take them, right?
They're going to Betty.
Oh, okay.
And I'll leave them here. They don't show up much with the green vase and the green.
Oh, but I love those. they're iris or?
Yeah.
Siberian.
Okay, yeah. And they're beautiful. They're just absolutely beautiful.
Her daughter was staying, that's how we got them. Her daughter was staying renting someplace in North Troy. I think it was North Troy, wasn't it?
North Troy.
And she had a whole bunch of these.
They'd gone wild, they needed separating.
And they said, we could take a few. So we took, you wouldn't believe how they took.
Oh, yes, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe you missed it, but one year, was it last year, I brought tons of them, put them in bags, dug them up, the roots and everything else, and a lot of people in the church got them. And then Mary came up to me afterwards, she said, I didn't get any, so I said, so I brought some more the following week for Mary.
They're hard to dig.
Oh,
They're hard to dig.
Their roots are,
yes.
And they
they're hard.
intermingle.
It's like old mesh
Oh,
It's
under
like
the ground.
what do they call it, rhizome, I think they call it, and they're harder than a rock.
Yeah.
And-
Hostas are the same way.
Yes,
Hostas.
Yes.
We used to have them out here.
we did. And I dug around them, I
You
understand.
got one?
We gradually, there's a few out front
Yeah.
left, and there's a couple over here left. But it was hard to keep the mulch around them and everything, and people want, well, it's just a lot of work.
I
So,
thought, I use them and it keeps the weeds, you don't get weeds around them or anything, and it's great for,
they had that mulch bed around them, and it just took a lot of work, all summer to keep that looking nice.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
And see, I use them because it does look
We don't
nice.
have any trouble with that part of it.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't the hostas, it was
Digging
the
them
fact.
out, digging them out is a trouble.
Well, it was keeping those mulch beds all cut nice and everything.
Yeah.
Huh.
So we did last, and
But like I said, weeds don't come around mine and it's fantastic.
because they leaf out, they kill the
Yeah,
weeds
they
off.
kill- Yeah.
Lynette put them in originally.
She did, yeah. Yeah, and that did a long time ago. So forth. Well, if you're gonna be here that week, would you mind doing the Sabbath school?
Sure.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Because I start off early, but it all depends. Dad will take a nap, he just doesn't go fast. There's no turning up the speed.
Yeah.
So, that's that. So that would be a help. I'll do next week.
Sure, I'd love to.
That's good, I appreciate it. All right, well, I'm gonna see what's going on downstairs, see if we can get some
Okay.
some lunch.
Everything-
Thank you,
these-
Jim.
These are
Thank you,
keeping
Doc.
separate because they go to Betty. Wait a minute, I think one of these is mine. That's Betty's, this is mine. All right, these two go to Betty. And this is mine, so I'm gonna put that in here.
Let me have what you want me to take and I'll go up with the truck.
I don't know what you can take. Here. I think I go to the bathroom or something. Well, you got those flowers, so.
Okay. Meet you downstairs.
These and this. Oh, the window's gotta be closed.
Oh,